One, two, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Hey everybody, it's Sam Jacobs. Welcome to the Sales Hacker Podcast. We've got a great show for you today. It is one of my favorite episodes, actually. It's Pete Crosby. He's the Chief Revenue Officer of Ometria, which is a marketing technology platform. I think they're a CDP, a customer data platform. Started in the UK, now expanding globally and internationally. Pete's a longtime veteran of the SaaS world and the sales world. We hear about his story. He worked at Burger King and was a DJ originally and eventually made his way into the sales world. But most importantly, I think we hear about motivation, we hear about coaching, and we hear about the four levels of the four levers of sales velocity and how Pete thinks about driving sales both as a science but also as a coaching framework to help people develop. And it's a really inspiring conversation. And so I'm excited to bring it to you. Now, before we get there, we want to thank our sponsor. Today, the sponsor of our show is this company called Outreach, who you may have heard of. Outreach triples the productivity of sales teams and empowers them to drive predictable and measurable revenue growth. By prioritizing the right activities and scaling customer engagement with intelligent automation, Outreach makes customer-facing teams more effective and improves visibility into what really drives results. By the way, Pete's also a founding member of the London Revenue Collective and just a fantastic leader in the community. And so without further ado, let's listen to Pete Crosby on the Sales Hacker Podcast. Hey everybody, it's Sam Jacobs. Welcome to the Sales Hacker Podcast. We are incredibly excited to have on the show today Pete Crosby. Pete is one of the better known, if not the most well-known revenue leaders in the London area. And let me quickly tell you about his background. Currently, he's the Chief Revenue Officer of a company called Ometria, but he's been growing SaaS revenue teams for almost 20 years. Ometria itself was placed in Deloitte's top 10 growth businesses in the UK. They raised a $21 million Series B in August 2019. Prior to that, he ran revenues at Viadeo. He'll tell me if I pronounced that correctly, from Series A to IPO, and most recently took Triptease from 2 million to 10 million in a successful Series B in just 18 months. He's one of the 3 founding members of the London Revenue Collective, which we're incredibly excited about. And he's also a non-executive sitting on the board of Cluster, a pre-Series A sales analytics startup. He's run teams all over the world, including China, Singapore, Latin America, United States, Africa, Russia, and of course, Europe. He lives with his family in North Wales. Pete, welcome to the show.
Hi, Sam. Thanks for having me.
We're excited to have you. So the first place that we start is what we call your baseball card. We like to contextualize your expertise. We like to know why you are such a thought leader and an expert. So you wrote on the sheet that we prepared, Chief Revenue Officer. Oh, it must be non-executive director. That's what NED stands for. So tell us about Ometria first, and then you can tell us about Cluster. But what does Ometria do, and how did you find the company?
Well, it's interesting because you said, please correct me if I pronounce Viadeo wrong. You got it perfect, but you got Ometria wrong and said Ometria. And
sorry.
My CEO would never forgive me if I didn't correct you, so it's Ometria.
I'm sorry, Ometria.
It's okay. We work with retailers. So we're a MarTech platform, which allows retailers to create marketing experiences that their customers will love. We're very focused only on retail, and it means because we've had such a narrow and tight ICP, we've been able to become fabulous at that very, very narrow, tight series of things that a retailer would want to do. So we grew in the UK market, and we very recently launched into the US. In fact, our office just opened this month in January 2020 in New York. You asked me how I found Ometria. They kind of found me. I was working, as you said, for a hospitality startup. We'd just done that run from $2 to $10 million really fast. And Ivan was looking for a COO that could do that for him. And he came and heard me speak at a conference and took the mickey a little bit because he asked me a question which I thought was a ridiculously stupid question. But it did get him on my radar, and which meant I remembered him. And then he got a connection to me the following day. We had a chat, and I joined very, very quickly after that. So they came looking for me. And
what? Obviously, I have to ask, what was the stupid question that he asked?
He said, I've got 18 direct reports. What should I do? What should I do? I said, you probably need to hire a sales leader. And he said, oh, thank you. And he made a little note.
That's awesome. Well, listen, I'm excited that Ometria is doing, and you hear, I'm a quick learner. So once you told me how to pronounce it correctly, I'm never going to make that mistake again. And Ivan, if you're out there, I apologize. But how did we get here? What's your background? I mentioned in your bio that you have 20 years of experience, but walk us through how you came to be in sales and sort of like the rise of Pete Crosby, particularly in the London area.
Yeah, well, I was actually a DJ and a Burger King operative. I spent 7 years working for Burger King, never McDonald's, always Burger King, as a student, and then supporting my wife. And one day my father said to me, "Pete, you have to go to London and get a proper job." And I said, "I can't do that, Dad, because I haven't got any money." And he said, "Don't worry, I'm going to buy you a train ticket." So I went to London, and there was a job fair looking for various types of people. And there was the BMW garage that wanted sales guys, and there was a whole bunch of companies that wanted bus drivers, and then there was a media sales company. I had no idea what media sales was, or that I did know I didn't want to sell cars. So I went for an interview with them that day. They said, "You've got the job." And I said, "I'll take it." And they said, "Do you know what this means?" And I said, "Yeah, of course I know what this means." So a few weeks later, I drove to London in a rented van with the cat and my wife and all of our possessions. And what I didn't realize is that within 4 weeks, everyone that started the same day as me had been fired, because media sales is actually quite difficult. It means selling ads in magazines, and we sold literally the worst magazines in the world. I had no idea how bad it was, and I was the specialist sales guy for Chemical Processing Technology International magazine, selling ads all over the world.
I just renewed my subscription. I love their work.
Are you an avid reader? Well, then you are the person that fills in, because we had to say this thing. We had to say, Sam, if you take out an ad with us, thick bundles of reader response cards will land monthly on your doormat. So you must be the guy.
I'm a perfect demo for the publisher. Yeah.
So glad we're talking. So anyway, I took a job with these guys. I was the one guy that made it. But as with a lot of people, I told this story to a bunch of SDRs at a conference recently. I also was told, "You're going to get fired because you didn't sell enough." And so it was the Friday I was due to leave. I hadn't sold enough ad space. And on the Friday, back in those days, we didn't have Signable. We had, which is what we use, or DocuSign that you probably use over there. We had fax machines, and so the fax machine rang. I knew it wasn't going to be for me because I hadn't done any deals, but the bit of paper started to come through. And in those days, what you would see is normally an ad coming through for ink cartridge for your fax machine, which is so depressing when you thought it was going to be your deal. Anyway, this one, we could see the company logo, so it's a deal. And the smallest deal we're able to do comes through, which was for £2,000, like $3,000. And one of my friends, a guy who I'll never forget, called Ajit Atakarala, he said, "No one's around, Pete, stick your name on the bottom of that, and then you'll keep your job." So I signed my name on the bottom, got my £60 of commission, and kept my job, did a deal the following week, and suddenly learned to love sales, love the buzz of sales. And I started from there. So I was, like everybody, a useless and incompetent sales guy that kind of scraped through by working extremely hard and having a little bit of luck as well.
What happened after that horrific first start, but also the thing that whet your appetite? How did you make your way into startup land? What was it that piqued your interest, or what was the transition from media sales, ad sales, into probably some form of SaaS at some point in the last 20 years?
Yeah, so I went to a very early SaaS company within about a year of that story, and they were looking for the first sales guy to sell what was at the time, I guess you'd now call it GovTech. We were selling a very early SaaS product, subscription product, into local government municipalities here in the UK. And it was super early. They were kind of naive, but they knew I was pretty good, but I'd never sold anything like that before. I didn't even have a laptop back in those days. We had these kind of, laminated paper, and I had my demo deck was basically 6 pages printed out that looked a bit like the website. And then you turn the page when you said, and we click here and you turn the page, and actually it was really good, because even though, I mean, you're laughing and I think it's hilarious too, but actually it was really, really good exercise in how to do a demo, because the prospect couldn't click off and go in different directions. It never, ever crashed. It was always tailored to the prospect, and it put you in perfect control of the pitch. But I had one of those. I sold the very first one of those that they'd ever sold in 6 weeks. We grew it really fast. I ended up, like a lot of people listening to this probably, I became a manager and discovered I loved managing entirely as a result of being pretty good at selling and as having to hire people and there being no one else to do the managing. So it turned out to be me. And then we launched into the US, and that was successful too. So I got to come and live in Boston, Massachusetts, and sell to municipalities in Pittsburgh and New York and Raleigh. And it was that really that made my SaaS career suddenly become an awful lot quicker, become a bit more of a rocket ship, because suddenly I had international experience, I had SaaS experience, I knew how to manage and run teams, I sat on the senior management team before I was 30, so I was able to talk at a senior level, I could interact with board members, and all of that was that very first proper startup experience.
What was the biggest, I asked this question to a lot of people because one of the common things that we always talk about is some individual contributors, some top performing salespeople do not make the transition successfully to management. And there's always, and sometimes they do, because sometimes it's sort of the entire package. What for you are the key skills that you think are important as somebody moves from being an individual contributor to a frontline manager and then to a manager of managers?
Well, we could definitely talk about that a lot. I think the very first thing for me that made it really work was that I realized that I just loved people. And that's the same reason that I believe I was good as a salesperson. I've just become endlessly fascinated by the individuals in front of me. So, for example, I'm one of these people that rebel quite a lot when I'm shown things like Myers-Briggs. I noticed one of the questions in your survey was, name something you think sucks. And for me, it's Myers-Briggs. I would like to push it off a cliff or stick it in room 101 or whatever you have to do. Because how can you take 7 billion people and put them into 16 categories? It's ridiculous. And of course, most people, or at least people with a little bit of experience of the world, tend to move along the line. For example, I'm sure your listeners know about Myers-Briggs. So one of the differentiators is, are you an introvert or are you an extrovert? And most of us know that you can move along that line, generally speaking. I guess I can categorize myself in Myers-Briggs by saying I'm probably an introvert who's pretended to be an extrovert. But what I did learn, to answer your question better, is just to love people and love what they're interested in. And when you become a manager, of course, what you have in front of you is an individual who has dreams and hopes and a family and all sorts of dimensions beyond their role. And learning how to listen to that person and help them to improve and get better has been one of the things I've most enjoyed as a manager. And of course, if you can treat someone like that, then ideally they'll become motivated and inspired. And what I've loved about building teams ever since then is, how do you genuinely motivate people, not cynically, but really get someone really fired up about what they're doing because they love the people that they work with. So there's the people side. And the second part of that is not something I did at first, but something I learned to do, which is to build a framework around everything. Every time you do something, ask yourself, how did I do that? And why did I do that? Why was that person successful? How can I have lots more people who perform in that way? Why did that particular thing work in a pitch or a discovery call? And how can we put a framework around that and replicate it so that everything we do is endlessly scalable? And once I learned that, it made it much, much easier to grow and scale businesses and hopefully be a successful manager.
What is the biggest challenge that people face that don't succeed as managers? Do you think it's that, or I guess put another way, what's the number one mistake you see as people move up that path? Is it that they lack the, like you said, the endless fascination with other people? They're just not empathetic enough about other humans or curious enough? Or what do you think that the common mistakes people make are?
I don't think the common mistake is made by the person themselves, generally speaking. It's made by the company. I think as startups, but I'm sure the corporate world is exactly the same, we are really, really poor at helping people to grow. And that's partly natural. It's partly because we're small and we're moving fast and we have limited positions and we're probably still building out our frameworks. But the other reason is, if you have a fabulous individual contributor who's ready to move to the next level, how are you going to help that person? Should they become a manager? Most people want to become a manager because they think that that is the route to success. But there's a number of fabulous articles on this subject around how to take an individual contributor and allow them to expand their scope, expand their responsibility, expand their position and their reputation inside the company, expand the type of business that they do, so that they can grow on a pathway which is not a management pathway. So many people move to management because they think it's the next step. And the moment they do that, rather than really want to become a manager, my feeling is you're setting yourself up for failure. And for the individual involved, my strong advice is really ask yourself, do you want to earn less money than you were earning previously? Because that's often what happens as a manager. Do you really want to be responsible for 20 people and their ridiculous problems? Because that's definitely going to happen. And do you really want to go on a pathway which is arguably less thrilling than the thrill of being an individual contributor? And if the answer to that is yes, expect it to be even harder than the path that you took as an individual contributor. One of the things that I've seen so many times with managers that I've hired, people that I love and who have done really well, is in a startup environment, you've got to be such a self-starting individual. And round about Series A time, almost everyone in the company, you've probably got 40 or 50 people, you're all self-starters, you're all self-motivated, you're all risk-takers, you all came on a lower salary than you might otherwise have got. And then the next people that you hire are slightly less risk-taking. It's natural, otherwise they would have gone and joined a pre-Series A or a seed stage startup. So those individuals are slightly less self-starting often. It doesn't mean they're not good. They're wonderful. They're truly wonderful individuals. But the mistake a lot of early managers make is just to assume that people will just get on and do things in the way that they did. And that, in my experience, is almost never the case, because the successful profile of a post-Series A startup and then a post-Series B startup, the successful profile that you hire is not the same as the individual that you are that probably was in that company much earlier. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And I think it's quite insightful. So that speaks to, one of the things that you referenced just now, which is motivation. And one of the things that you're passionate about, but I think is a challenge for so many companies and for so many managers and for so many people. How do you, or, what is your framework for discovering or unlocking, or however you would characterize the actualization of motivation, such that people can be passionate and enthusiastic high contributors and high performers in your organization? How do you do that? How do you motivate people?
Well, there's so many answers to that question. There's so many frameworks, but maybe if I just talk about two for a moment. And the first is so simple, and I'm sure most people that are running teams are doing something like this, but I'm going to mention it anyway because I see so many companies that fail to do this well. Whenever we hire somebody new, we just take on a 1 hour session to try and understand what their long-term goal is. And that doesn't have to be a professional goal. For an SDR, it's frequently, I'd like to be an AE. But it could equally be, as we had with a member of my team not so long ago. They wanted to move out of the city. They wanted to be able to bring up their child in a non-urban location. So the consequence of that is they were going to need to save a bunch of money to get a mortgage, which means they're going to need to get some bonuses, which means they're going to need to make some sales. For me, that's so much more powerful than I want to be an AE or I want to make my target. So once we've found what is a long-term goal, could just be 12 months when you're younger, doesn't need to be 10 years away. And then we look at what are the medium-term objectives that have to be achieved in order to make that long-term goal. And we normally try to make those somewhere between 3 to 6 months away, and they need to be really measurable. And those things, again, are things that need to be attained, like I want to make my target, or I want to get my discovery to a 70% score or above, or whatever, it doesn't really matter. What is super measurable, though, is the short-term goals that help you to get there. How do I know that week after week I'm moving in the right direction? So I guess I could bring that to life by talking about when I joined Ometria. The senior team when I joined Ometria was fabulous, like brilliant founding team, but obviously needed more management support. And so the small SDR team that we had already were kind of lost. They weren't really creating opportunities. They weren't really motivated. And just the act of giving people a pathway through the forest to prevent them from walking in circles is enough to really give someone that sense of motivation. I know where you need to go. I know how you are the pathway to take, and I can show you and hold your hand and show you the wayfinders. Let's go. And that in itself is extremely motivating. So the first framework is simply to have that kind of a basic personal development plan. It doesn't need to be super complicated. The second thing that we did at Ometria, which really gave that team a framework, is to understand how do you get from being an SDR doing, honestly, apart from selling to, I know you're an avid reader, Sam, but apart from selling to readers of Chemical Processing Technology International magazine, how do you get...
yeah, sneak that one in there.
You'll be up in the loft later, won't you?
With my cuppa and my Chemical magazine.
Well, apart from that job of selling on that magazine, there's almost nothing more soul destroying as it is here in the UK, wet January Friday afternoon where the sky is grey. When you're an SDR doing that role, it is so tough. So how do you put a framework around understanding how what I'm doing is genuinely impactful for the company? Because my belief is that sales development teams are the engine room of most SaaS startups. They are the big cog, which once that cog is cranked and is rolling, like your entire business is functioning. So why would you want to sit at your desk feeling so miserable when you could be so excited? And so what we did with that team was just learn how many calls do we actually, or touches or whatever you want to call it, how much activity do we actually need to do to get to a deal? And so we figured out we need to make this many social touches, this many calls, and this many emails, and that will lead to what we called a bunch of meaningful conversations. And we knew that we had 4% conversion, pretty much. It was 4.2% when I joined. So if you make 100 calls, you're going to have 4 meaningful conversations. And then we defined what that is. So you could say I had a meaningful conversation. And we followed that all the way through the discoveries and the deep dives and the various meetings until we got to an opportunity, and then we got to a deal. Then we reverse engineered how much every meaningful conversation you had was worth. And we were able to say, hey, every time you have that meaningful conversation, even if it's an important decision maker telling you to go away, but you had a meaningful conversation with the right person, that was worth $2,500 worth of value to the company. And instantly you're able to place that value on that. You're able to give people not only a pathway through the process, but you're able to place value on each action that people are performing, which makes you feel really good when you go home having had a thankless day with huge activity and not much to show for it. But you know that it's been of value to the company because you know that on average across the quarter, you're going to be spitting out some really interesting figures, which will drive value for the company. And then you can link that all the way through to shareholder value. You can link that right the way through. We know, for example, that every dollar we make in the UK is probably worth, I don't know, $5 in valuation, but we know that if we do that in the US, it's probably worth $20 in valuation. Therefore, making that call, making that meaningful conversation, having that discovery call in the US is worth an enormous amount to the company. And that seems to give a really great sense of self-worth and motivation to even the most junior of SDRs.
That's a really fantastic example. So, and that leads me to sort of a related question, not exactly on motivation or coaching, but really on sales development. You've been doing this for 20 years, and it's clear that you're passionate about both the science of sales, meaning the math behind the conversion formulas, but also the discipline of how to have a meaningful conversation. And I'm just curious because, we've all been doing this a long time, and there's actually a lot of debate right now about the efficacy of the traditional SDR framework. What are you seeing at Ometria? Are you seeing that it's still business as usual? It's still, a numbers game. You still have to use the phone. Are you seeing new channels or new mediums or new ways of getting people's attention as an SDR? What are you seeing that's shifting in the landscape as you try to build pipeline for Ometria to drive growth?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think the real answer is that it's always going to be a blend, and a huge amount will depend on the category that you're targeting, the stage that you're at. But the trend that excites me the most at Ometria is really the partnerships model, and the way that we are measuring that is simply by looking at the key unit economics. What is the most effective route to market? And for us, when I do my research and when I look at companies, we're just emerging out of we've done our Series B, we're coming out the other side of $10 million of ARR, so we're starting to think about that 10 to 30 and then $30 to $100 million run. And in that kind of growth period, I don't know if any of your listeners can give examples and show me where I'm wrong, because if I am, I'd love to see it. But it seems to me that you need to have a really effective partnerships model to do that run from 10 to $100 million. I don't see any SaaS businesses that can really make this work without building a partnerships model. And for us, it's kind of obvious why. If you think about the 4 levers of sales velocity, if you have a partner who introduces a lead to you, the average sales cycle is probably going to be shorter than if it was an SDR. And that's probably because they only introduced you because they know that they're in the market. And probably your volume win rate or your cash win rate will both be higher, because if a trusted partner is suggesting Ometria or whoever the SaaS business is, then there's a very strong chance that you're going to win more times than, not more times than you're going to win more frequently than when it's a cold call from an SDR, because a trusted partner has introduced you. So building that partnerships model at scale such that you can send a partnerships team out to build that model right across the US or right across Europe, right across Asia, that's something that really excites me at the moment. And then turning that partnerships model into something which is extremely efficient, because my experience as someone who rocks up at conferences and sees partnerships managers who all know each other, they all talk to each other at the same conference, and they meet each other every week doing exactly the same thing. And what we're trying to do with our partnerships team is create something where we are highly measured, highly targeted by the partnerships we deliver, by the sourced in particular versus influenced opportunities that arise from those partnership relationships, and then look in particular at the 4 levers of sales velocity to make sure that that is more efficient than our SDR model. Now, it will never replace an SDR model, and the reason I mentioned blend at the beginning is because we're always going to need human beings on the phone to do the discovery and make sure that we're moving in the right direction. But what I would like to see is, as a result of what we're doing at Ometria, is a reduction in the ratio of SDRs to AEs, so that it becomes more efficient, and then much more emphasis placed on partnerships, because one partnerships manager can manage multiple partners deliver multiple opportunities, those opportunities close at a higher ratio in a lower level of time, which of course makes our unit economics much more efficient. And I want to be seeing myself on the KBCM stats at the end of the year when everybody looks at how they're rating versus other SaaS companies. I want to be seeing everything we're doing in the top, every one of our key unit economics in the top quartile, versus running around on the average. So the thing that excites me most is our partnerships model right now.
When you say partnerships, there's tons of people that are listening that are kind of half nodding their heads because that sounds good, but they're not quite sure what you mean or define as a partner. So do you mean technology, implementation, integration, and consulting firms like a Deloitte or an Accenture? Do you mean marketing agencies? When you're thinking about partners, just help us frame it in our minds. Who are you talking about?
For us, we put partners into 3 categories. And the one that I'm talking about most is category number 1 for us. Well, maybe I should talk about what we do first. So we are working with retailers, integrating a highly complex, mission-critical platform for them to deliver messages to their customers. Typically, every single retailer will have an agency partner. And there's so many agencies out there. So the particular thing I'm talking about is making sure we build strong relationships with those agencies so that they recommend us as the obvious choice, which is increasingly being the case. There are other types of partner we have too, but that's the critical one. So less technology partners, more integration, agency, consultant partners.
Got it. Thank you for saying that. Now, something else that you've mentioned, but I just want to define it for the audience because they're probably scribbling away, listening to drop these nuggets. But the 4 levers of sales velocity, what are those, so that folks out there understand what they are?
Yeah, the first is average sales cycle, so ASC. So how long does it take your deal to get from, normally, I guess not everyone measures it in the same way, but for me, it's from the creation of the opportunity to the close of the deal. Our average sales cycle in our mid-market is round about 75 days, but I see that is closer to 60 days when we have a partnership-derived opportunity. So average sales cycle is the first one. Second of those is average deal size, so the ARPA, average revenue per account. And I have quite a nice chart that I show when we've been doing our funding rounds, which demonstrates that our ARPA has gone up by about $1,000 every single quarter since Ometria was born in 2013. It was our 7th birth. It is our 7th birthday party today, as it happens.
Oh, happy birthday!
Thank you very much. That ARPA has consistently risen, and I want to be able to see inside the sales velocity measurement that number is consistently rising. Third of those is simply the number of deals that you have inside your pipeline. The way I do it, and I guess not everyone is the same, is I look at how many opportunities I have in my forward 90-day pipeline. So I guess that might change for some of your listeners. If you are focusing heavily on enterprise, maybe your opportunity window is 6 to 9 months long. I do have an enterprise pipeline as well, but my mid-market pipeline tends to sit in that sort of 90-day window. So I look at my forward 90 days. And then I just want to look at my percentage win rate. Most people tend to look at cash win rates. I've never really understood why. I'd love to have a debate with someone on this. I think volume win rate is much more important. That is because the minute you have a bunch of large deals in there, you're skewing your numbers toward those large deals, whereas volume win rate normalizes your business. Every single deal counts equally. So then to create sales velocity, you're looking at number of opportunities multiplied by the deal value, your average deal value, multiplied by your volume win ratio, which in most SaaS businesses sits somewhere between sort of 20 and 30%, and then divide that result by the length of your sales cycle. That gives you a number. The really fun thing, if you want to talk about sales velocity, Sam, the really fun thing with sales velocity is your board doesn't have a clue what you're talking about, and your senior management team probably don't have a clue what you're talking about either. So this is one of those numbers that I use as part of my revenue leadership team to model exactly where we're going and ensure that we're constantly getting better and better and better. But I don't tend to use it very often in board reporting or in senior management team reporting, because I tend to be left with a sea of blank faces. Instead, I'm much more likely to talk about those 4 numbers themselves. We have more opportunities in our forward pipeline than we did before. The deal value is rising. The win rate is improving, or it's stable, because only so far you can improve the win rate. And then the sales cycle is reducing. And as most of your listeners will probably know, you need to be very careful how you pull those 4 levers. For example, if you want your deal value to rise, so you tinker with your pricing model to make the numbers go up, then probably your number of opportunities is going to drop because you have less people that can afford your solution. If you aggressively improve the quality of your opportunity so the win rate rises, naturally, again, your opportunity number will come down. Maybe your sales cycle will lengthen as well, because now it's a bigger decision for them to make. So there's so many interesting things that you can do inside that. But those are the 4 critical things that I focus on for making sales velocity effective.
If you're a brand new advisor to a company and you're looking at those 4 factors, to your point, right? You sort of mentioned it or alluded to it. There's only so much you can do with win rate. Is there a place that you typically start? Is it just let's build the size of the pipeline, let's get more opportunities into the pipeline? Is that, or is it really totally situation dependent and every situation is completely different?
Yeah, I think you just answered the question. For me, at least, it's the latter. Maybe to bring it to life, I can talk about joining Ometria. When I joined Ometria, what was clear is that the win rate was exceptionally good. And you often find that in early stage startups. So they'd raised a Series A when I joined. So they'd got a product market fit. They were ready to put the pedal to the metal and demonstrate predictability. The win rate was really high. It was running at 50%. But that's because you have founders of the company involved in many of the deals. That's naturally not going to continue. So win rate wasn't really the place to start. It was even a bit of a false friend, because you know that is going to drop, and you have to educate the senior team that you can't rely on that 50% number forever. The deal value was consistently rising. It was lower, much lower than it is now. But what wasn't done well was the quantity of opportunities, and that was because there wasn't, for us, a proper SDR model that was repeatable. And so the first thing to do was figure out how to get that repeatable before throwing more SDRs into the mix. And then I guess my advice then is very, very closely watch the win rate and the sales cycle and the deal value, because the minute you're throwing everything after one of those 4 metrics, there's a very strong chance that you're damaging or affecting those other 3, and you need to watch those really, really closely. In the early days for me, it was making some assumptions. I didn't understand how we could possibly grow the business without more opportunities. We all know that there's probably a threshold even for numbers of opportunities you can create, but you don't know what that threshold is. So then what we did was we took a big step back, and we started by just assessing what we believed to be the total addressable market for us at that time, just in the UK. And then inside that total addressable market, what was the ICP that we cared about? And then how many retailers for us, or how many prospects really is that? And But if you build a bottom-up model for your budget, how can you figure out, well, how many SDRs will we have at an optimum level? How many do we have now? And so step one was just get those early guys motivated and delivering opportunities, and then figure out how many we thought we needed to have that optimum level. Once we can prove that level of predictability and keep an eye on all the metrics, then it's about thinking, do we expand the ICP? Do we move to a second European location? Should we open in the US and then take that machine that we've built and see how it can operate in the next market?
If there's a lot of folks out there, sort of the theme of my questions is there's a lot of folks out there that are struggling with outbound SDRs right now, and knowing nothing about, any of these businesses because they're completely, undefined and amorphous from my lips right now. But you mentioned building repeatability into the SDR, profession role within an organization. Is it messaging that you often think is the problem? Is it the measurement of activities? If I'm trying to build a successful outbound SDR organization or demand generation organization, again, always everything's different, but where would you think to start to deliver repeatability?
Okay, well, I'll try not to do that irritating consultant thing of not answering the question because it's so amorphous. I'm just going to give you an answer, and then everyone
Thank you.
Complain that I missed something. I would start with the quantitative stuff, and then secondly, I'd look at qualitative. So the reason for that is if you just get an SDR, get them on the phone, and let's get ourselves to, 50 calls a day. And then let's map out the process that comes after. I mean, do we have a process that takes us through to an opportunity? So first of all, we need to know what an opportunity is. So I use the CHAMP criteria, but you might use MEDDIC or BANDS, or who cares? There's a million acronyms out there. Just use one of them at least. Let's get started. Let's define what it needs to be an opportunity. Let's have a manager or a senior person evaluate whether it really is an opportunity. The SDR shouldn't own whether or not something's an opportunity. And then let's define the steps to get there. So let's imagine we make a bunch of phone calls, and then we have a bunch of what I call meaningful conversations. And from those, we probably book some discoveries. And from that, we probably hold some discoveries, but probably not as many as we would have liked. And then at Ometria, we have another stage where we have a deep dive. It's effectively Discovery Mark II. And eventually, that's going to lead us to the creation of an opportunity or the killing of that lead. So I would map that entire process, and then I'd just get started. Let's just throw our SDRs at that issue and see what happens. How many meaningful conversations do we have? How many discoveries can we book? How many discoveries can we hold? Once we've got that running, assuming something is pumping out the other end, then we can look at the ratios based on our experience. So if you're running at something like 3 to 5% of calls are turning into a conversation, that feels okay. And if you're able to turn at least half of those into a discovery, that kind of feels okay. And if you're not, why not? So that instantly gives you the space to understand where to place your time from a qualitative perspective. So if meaningful conversations are not turning into discoveries, why is that? Are we bad at handling gatekeepers? Have we not defined our value statements well? Do we know how to tell them what our company does? Do we know how to very quickly unearth some pain so we can get the discovery call booked? Do we know how to ask for a discovery? Are we, as I noticed in one of my companies, making the mistake of kind of doing a mini discovery on the very first call when they hadn't really bought into the point of the discovery? Isn't it better to do the discovery in a separate call that you book in, have it on Calendly or something like that? So in order to find out where the qualitative problems are, if you've got the data and you've got the measurements and you know what all your conversion ratios are, then you can start to pick apart where you need to devote your time. 20 years ago, I developed a method of scoring a pitch, which I've now rolled out into 10 different scorecards. So now we can score our discovery call. And that means that we can tell an SDR, hey, your intro is fabulous. We love the way you do the paradigm shift. But the way that you are dealing with the closing questions is not so good. So let's work on that. And those are coaching opportunities. So I split the qualitative and the quantitative up in order to get ourselves to that kind of position.
Wonderful. First of all, thank you for breaking that down for us. It's just really, really useful. And you say it. Some of these things are sort of obvious or known, but you describe them in a really meaningful way. So. First of all, Pete, thank you. We're coming to Pete. Can you hold on one second?
Sure. Is your dog destroying something?
Yes, I think he is, because I keep shouting, "Be quiet," and it's clearly not my wife. So I have to go see what's happening. I will be right back.
Oh, wait, don't worry.
Are you still there?
Yes. Did the dog eat your dinner, or is it?
It was just, you see, I was like muting myself because I thought it was my wife, like ruffling bags around. I'm like, "Be quiet." And nothing. I was getting no response. I'm like, that must be somebody else.
That's okay. I'm glad you told me it was you muting. There was a bunch of silences, and I thought maybe I'd gone offline, but I just kept on talking.
Anyway, I'm sorry. All right. Well, maybe we'll leave that in. But in all seriousness, that I really do appreciate the sort of like the deep dive, and it's really, really helpful for the people that are listening, because sometimes these things sound obvious, but breaking them down into discrete steps in a framework, as you've done, is really, really helpful.
Okay, so, I hope so. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. So we're almost at the end of our time together. This is the part in the conversation where we kind of like to pay it forward, and we like to hear about influences, content, books, things that you think we should be aware of, or that should, that have inspired you in some way. They could be a great boss that you had. It could be a great book that you've read. So when you think about the influences that have helped contribute to your success, what comes to mind?
I think about individual people to start with. I read plenty of books, and I will talk about some in a moment. But I think the archetype of a great CRO, unless you really feel like you're on a pathway eventually to being an entrepreneur, which is certainly not my pathway, I think that the CRO entrepreneur marriage is something that's worth taking a lot of time to think about, particularly when you're choosing your next role, because entrepreneurs are crazy. They're completely nuts. They ruin your life and give you sleepless nights, and yet they're wonderful to be with, which is probably not unlike having a husband or wife. I have worked with some fabulous entrepreneurs, and I guess I'd pick out my current CEO, actually, Ivan Mesure, from whom I've learned some incredible things. For example, I think I've become a much more prepared individual as a result of working with Ivan. I now have every single meeting that I go to planned, and I know exactly what I think 7 days in advance of having that meeting, which was not like 2 years ago. I've changed that completely. I now have 17 hours of my 70-hour Ometria week dedicated to meeting preparation. And I think that my direct reports have got better as a result of that, because they're not getting my firing from the hip answers, they're getting my detailed thoughts. That's come from working with Ivan. I spent 7 years working for a social network, 5 years of it in Paris, 2 years in Beijing. And Dan Sefarti, the French entrepreneur who founded Viadeo and bought Tianji, was a huge influence on me because of the way he thought about change. We would almost every year change the way that we did things. We'd make things better that were already working, and it was one of the things that made us particularly successful. We were just never satisfied. And the thing I've taken from that is, the minute I've got a machine working, the minute I have a framework, operational, a model that I'm happy with, I guess I'm so tempted to sit back and admire my handiwork. And what I now do is try and change it again and make it better again. So that's come from Dan and from Ivan, two brilliant people that I highly recommend you follow on LinkedIn or Twitter or wherever you can find them. And from a book perspective, I want to recommend a book that's really timely at the moment, which is Relentless by Tim Grover. And the reason for that is it has a Kobe Bryant quote on the front. He was Kobe Bryant's coach, and he was Michael Jordan's coach. And I picked it up and read it again after the terrible events of losing this brilliant guy who was not even halfway through his life, and yet so incredible. But what I learned from the Tim book, and I really recommend you read it, is how to consistently be striving for better and better and better. How Michael Jordan said that he hated the author of the book and would never speak to him again after he finished playing. But the guy made him so much better because he taught him the art of becoming better and better and better, of not being satisfied with one ring. When everyone was celebrating on the tour bus because Jordan had got his first ring, he didn't celebrate. And he didn't celebrate because he knew he wanted to be the greatest ever. And he was going to need to win 5 rings in order to be the greatest ever. And he got himself straight back in the gym, and he went through the pain and he started again. It's why you get a guy like Sidney Crosby from from the Penguins, who will spend his entire summer practicing one move over and over and over again. We'll just take over an ice rink and do it. So I'd highly recommend that book, Relentless. Yeah, so Dan Separti, Ivan Mazur, and then this book, which is mostly about Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant and how they got so impressive. It's called Relentless.
Pete, thank you so much for all of that, except for the part where you spoke highly of Sidney Crosby. As a Washington Capitals fan, I can't let that stand.
I'm so sorry. As we're talking, my son has just run past my office window, and you might have noticed that I share a surname with Crosby. Which is
a long-lost cousin.
I really hope that's true. So my son plays ice hockey, and when he was much younger, he took the 87 shirt and Crosby because he was so excited to emulate his hero. What he didn't realize, and what we don't realize when we're 10 years old, is that means you're going to be hated by every other hockey playing child in the entire country, and they're going to try and clap you on ice rinks up and down the UK, which is why my son's actually permanently in and out of accident and emergency, but he does love his hockey.
Well, I admire his courage for picking such a villain but also a great player. And I'm just teasing. I have a lot of respect for Sid the Kid. Pete, folks are listening, and I think they genuinely are probably going to be pretty inspired by listening to you speak, and probably want to work with you or for you or just get to know you in some way. Are you okay if people reach out to you? And if so, what's your preferred medium of outreach? If there's a listener out there that wants to share something with you.
If people either whichever is easier. So it's such a simple question, such a complicated answer, but let me explain why. If you want to drop me an email, pete.d.crosby@gmail.com, I will answer everything. If they want to drop me a LinkedIn message, I won't connect because I only connect to people that I've actually met, but I'm happy off the back of a LinkedIn message to do a video call, and then I'll definitely connect. It just keeps my network really strong, and it means if you want to connect to someone in my network, I know them personally and will definitely connect them. But I'm happy to talk to anyone, a peer or someone junior who is just trying to make their way. I love doing that. If you're in the UK, I have 3 breakfasts a week, always with a stranger, and I have 2 dinners a week, always with a stranger, and I never fail to learn something, no matter how junior or senior the person I'm talking to. So if you're in the States, I can't do that, but if you're in the UK, I can definitely do that.
What a great answer. A complicated but great answer. Pete, thanks so much for being on the show. Thanks for bearing with me through my dog troubles, and we'll talk to you on Friday for Friday Fundamentals.
Love it. Looking forward to it. Thanks for having me, Sam. Appreciate it.
Hey everybody, Sam Jacobs at Sam's Corner. I really, really like that interview with Pete Crosby. A couple things to think about and to take with you. One of them is, first of all, just thinking about what is the role of management. And I just love this phrase that he used. He talked about his endless fascination with other people, and that if you're not endlessly fascinated, if you're not curious about other people by other people, then management is probably not a good direction for you, because you take on the responsibility, the soul, the dreams, the ambitions, the fears of the people that you manage. And if other people fundamentally aren't interesting to you, or you're just more self-concerned, then you need to think twice about whether or not you really want to be a manager. And as Pete said, I've debated this a little bit on LinkedIn. Ultimately, to be a true global leader, I think you do have to run a team and be a manager. But you can make a lot of money and you can have a lot of career success and a lot of fulfillment being an individual contributor if that's your goal. But the first thing that you have to understand is, am I interested in other people? Do I like other people? You'll also note that Pete has a big problem with Myers-Briggs, so that was always fun and interesting. But he also talked about scaling and repeatability, and how the SDR, the sales development function, is the key to unlocking repeatability and scalability. And he talked about the 4 levers of sales velocity, and those, if I'm not mistaken, the number of opportunities, the average sales cycle, the average deal size, and the win rate. And those factors all leading to a number. I think it is number of opportunities times deal size times win rate divided by sales cycle length. equals a number, and that number is a number that sort of defines and implies and articulates the overall health of your revenue engine. And if you're measuring that on a regular basis, then you may be in good shape. The phrase that he uses and that he talked about meaningful conversations. How many activities, how many emails, phone calls, text messages, whatever, that it takes you to get to meaningful conversations. The number he threw out was, he said if you're between 3 and 4%, you're doing pretty good. So 100 calls leads to 4 meaningful conversations. Half of those, meaning 1 to 2, lead to true sales qualified opportunities. And then you're trying to close those at 20 to 30%. He also mentioned that the SDR should not be the ones that define what is an opportunity. That should be verified by a third party. So those are a couple of the lessons. He also talked about the key for him right now for scaling is partnerships and a partner channel. And for Ometria, that means agencies primarily. In other fields, it might mean the integrators and the technology consulting firms like Accenture or Deloitte or others of that ilk. But partners as a channel becoming more important as the traditional channels become a little bit less cost effective and a little bit more crowded. So I thought that was really interesting. And then he mentions this book, Relentless, about Kobe and about Michael Jordan as well, and then Sidney Crosby. So check out that book, Relentless, if you haven't had the opportunity. So really liked that episode. I thought Pete just had a lot of wisdom to share. And I guess the final thing I would say is just about motivation. Well, how do you motivate people? And part of it is about forcing them to define some kind of plan and then creating milestones to help them attain that plan. And that plan can be whatever their personal motivation is. So it was a great show. We've got a great episode for Friday on Friday Fundamentals, where he talks about how to interview people effectively and what the keys are when you're listening. So I really like that as well. So that's the show. Thanks to our sponsor, Outreach. Outreach triples the productivity of sales teams and empowers them to drive predictable and measurable revenue growth. And if you want to reach out to me as well, I'm available, linkedin.com/in/Sam F. Jacobs. Thanks for listening to the Sales Hacker Podcast. We'll talk to you next time.